For my AP summer work, I read a book by Stephen Hawking. It was the A Brief History of Time, just the cover of it. And I chose this book for a couple reasons, mainly because I knew who Stephen Hawking was, but nothing really, or why he was famous, or like any of his accomplishments. Kind of just knew he was a really smart scientist, but I wanted to learn more about him. And one thing that I did know about him was I saw it on social media one time was that he did a time travel experiment. But in order to test his theory, he sent out the invitations a week later, and he said that that proved time travel was not yet figured out because no one showed up to it, even though he sent them a week later. I don't know. It was just something random I saw, but that's what came to my mind when I saw him. And also, I chose this book because it had really good reviews, and I thought that it would give me a really good, broad um, explanation on a lot of basic physics. And it said that it can explain the complexities of cosmological physics with an engaging combination of clarity and wit, and that just sounded really interesting to me, and it was one of the reasons that I picked it. And as for the most interesting chapter that I read, I think it was the seventh chapter, but it was about black holes. And something about black holes that I had no idea about was that they actually come from stars. And also, it just was really in depth about how stars are created. I had no idea that they came from gases and that that's how they exist. And then it also explained that stars get to a point where they're so big and that they use so much gas and fuel, and that's why they are shine so bright, but that they get so big to a point where they use up way too much fuel and that they can't survive, and that it's actually interesting that the biggest stars end up lasting for the shortest amount of times, whereas because they just have so much mass and have to use so much fuel, and that it's interesting that smaller stars actually last for longer. And I did not know that stars could eventually disappear. And that's kind of what happens when stars turn into black holes. And I didn't realize that um, the heat that releases it was what causes them to shine. And I thought it was really interesting how in the theory of relativity, it says that nothing travels faster than light. And what happens is when a star starts to collapse on itself, the light cannot escape from it. And that's what causes them to look darker, and then you can't eventually see them. And then for the black hole, how if light can't escape, then nothing else can because nothing else can travel faster than light. And I thought that was really interesting. So the part of the book that caused me to ask more questions was the first chapter, and this was titled "A Picture" or "Our Picture of the Universe." And basically, this just went over a bunch of different famous philosophers and scientists' theories of how the world came to be and why it did. It was just really interesting to me because being in Gibbons and like our theology classes, we always learned that there was a first cause or something that prompted the world to start, but that like they didn't really know what. It was just really interesting to see different philosophers and scientists' perspectives on how it would work. And something that came from it that I thought was a really interesting take was that he explained that instead of trying to have a theory that would explain everything and how the universe came about, it was better to instead break it down into certain parts and have different theories for different ideas. And one of the last questions that like still was in this is like how the universe came and about and what started this. And still scientists today are still trying to prove this, and it's still a question that is asked all over. And one thing that I would like to study in our AP Physics this year was there was a chapter on time travel, and I mentioned earlier his experiment that I read about just randomly on social media. But I think it would be really cool to study that and see if this would ever actually be possible or if it's just another theory.